Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Helen Hall and I'm your host for today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. Please type your questions in the chat pod. The presenter will answer your questions during the presentation or in a Q&A session following the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website within a few days along with the slides, and the slides will be available for download. Our presenter today is Reese Lumsden. Reese, you're on.
Great, thanks Helen. So hello to everybody wherever you might be, either in the United States or if we have any international participants anywhere around the world, welcome. I'm in Everett, Washington, where it's actually starting to get a bit sunny here. We've actually started to see the sun, so that's good, as opposed to quite a long, cold winter. So my presentation today, the view from here, topics pertinent to the early engineering career. Basically what I'll do is just go through a brief kind of overview of what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll get into it, and I will then take questions. However, if you have questions on anything that I'm presenting at the time, please don't hesitate to either type in the chat. I'll stop periodically to look at that, or I believe there's a raise your hand kind of icon that you can press, and I'll kind of periodically flick over to make sure that I check that as well. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. We did a sound check beforehand, so I believe that audio is okay. But again, if anyone can't, please raise your hand, and see if we can get that fixed as well. So anyway, so I'll go through a brief background on myself. Then I'll talk about some of the projects and programs that I've been involved with. After that, I'll touch on some of the premises that I used for my writing for the book. Look at a couple of core subjects that I touch on in the book, but not necessarily referencing the book. My idea isn't to kind of say we'll go to the book. It's more to make this webinar a self-contained webinar. And then I'll look at, to wrap up, some recommended readings, some books and articles that I think are very good for you to find out more information. And after that, I'll have the formal kind of Q&A session. But as I said, if you want to ask questions throughout, then I'm more than happy to take them. So let's get started. Oops. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so who am I? First logical step, I guess, when any presenter is presenting, to give the audience an idea or context from the speaker's perspective. So as you can tell by my accent, probably, that I'm not from the United States. I'm actually from Australia. I was born in Australia and raised there, went to college there, started my working life there, and moved across to the United States in 2006. So I've been here now for about 5 years. Originally landed in California, but then moved across to Washington State. As you can see from my background, it's fairly varied. Educationally, I'm quite broad. I initially did a Bachelor of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, focusing on control and power systems. But even from my bachelor's degree, I knew that I was interested in a whole cross-section of technology and the way that technology impacted society. So I'd also done other postgraduate master's degrees, a Master's of Space Studies that I conducted at the International Space University in France. That was in 1999-2000. I've also done an MBA with a focus on technology management from La Trobe University. That was in Australia. And recently completed a Master's of Systems Engineering with a focus on network-centric systems from the Missouri University of Science and Technology. I finished that in 2010. I'd actually started a PhD in Systems Engineering in 2008, 2009, but due to my work commitments, I've had to put that somewhat on hold. It's still sitting in the background, but I've had to kind of pull back from that a little bit because I just don't seem to have the time. There's enough hours in the day, as I'm sure most of you will probably attest to, in that you probably have more things you want to do than you have time to do them. My working background, I started off in the Air Force as an engineering officer, the Royal Australian Air Force. floated to various assignments for about 5 years. Then I turned to private industry, operated as an independent consultant for a few years, and then when I came to the US, initially was an independent consultant for the National Aerospace Development Center, and then moved across to Boeing in 2006. Some other hobbies, or some of my hobbies, are I run marathons. I just finished my 8th marathon, and the highlight was Boston that I ran in April of this year. And I do like to write. I have written one full book myself, which is the one that this presentation is named after, The View from Here. That was published late last year, early this year. And I was also a co-author on another book called The Athena Global Earth Observation Guide 2005. That was focused on remote sensing and the utility of remote sensing. I wrote that with colleagues from a company called Athena Global, which is a resources management company based out of Canada. So just to give you a bit of an idea, it's an idea kind of me, kind of as an overall context. I thought the best way to give you an idea of some of the things specifically I've been involved in professionally is to kind of provide a collage of all the different programs and projects I've been involved with. Because when you talk to people and say, I've been involved with this project or that project or whatever, if they haven't heard of it before, if they haven't seen something about it beforehand, it's very hard for them to visualize or connect what you're saying to something tangible. And so this is a range of projects I've been involved with. I have been involved with others that are somewhat less tangible, but these are the main tangible ones. So starting at the top left-hand corner here, I'm currently involved with the KC-46A tanker program, which Boeing was awarded earlier this year. I'm part of a systems integration group that's working on the tanker program at the moment. I've also been involved in other airplane programs, such as the 777 program, not in the design phase, but more in the sustaining phase. So after it was delivered to customers and put into service, in that sustaining kind of role of making sure it continues going and earns revenue for the company. I have also been involved as part of the design phase with the 787 Dreamliner program, again with Boeing. Going back before that, when I was back in Australia, I was involved with the Armed Reconnaissance Helicopter program as a consultant to the Australian Defence Force. I was involved with some of the maintenance certification aspects of that program, and that was quite enjoyable. Kind of completely changing focus, I have spent some time at NASA at the Johnson Space Center with the Intelligent Control Systems Group, sorry. And I was involved with bioregenerative life support systems. I was actually doing my master's thesis and was involved in developing closed-loop control systems for potential manned missions to Mars, crewed missions to Mars. Sorry. A couple of other ones that you can see there that were fairly extensive programs. The Global Hawk Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, I was involved with trials of that between the Australian Air Force and the United States Air Force. I was involved with that when I was in uniform. Since being in IEEE, I've been involved with the Global Earth Observation System of Systems. With my background in systems engineering and my focus particularly on network-centric systems, Global Earth Observation is a key example of the capabilities that System of Systems can provide. Been involved in a couple of different satellite programs as well, FedSat and JSAT. Relatively peripherally, I wasn't part of the primary teams for that, but I was involved kind of on the edges of it. Also been involved with air traffic control systems when I was in the Air Force, and some software development when I was in capability development for the Australian Air Force as well. So as you can see, I've been involved in quite a broad cross-section of projects, primarily aerospace and defence, but I've also been involved in some other projects that sit outside that as well. So, getting into the kind of meat of the presentation. So the premise for my book and kind of why I decided to write a book like this was that I'm in my mid-30s now, and I thought that, well, I'm someone who's probably close enough in age to those going into their early engineering career, those in their early to mid-20s, to credibly say that I'm connected to them in some way, saying, well, it's only a few years ago that I was in your position. But I feel that I'm quote unquote senior enough to have established some credibility in that I've done a few things, had some achievements, and been able to do things from which I have lessons learned, or things where I have applied things that have either worked or not worked. And so basically the kind of analogy I have drawn for anyone's career, or anyone going down the path of starting their engineering career, it's a bit like, you feel a little bit like you're in a barrel in calm waters. Just picture yourself inside a barrel, and it's dark, and you're fairly confined. All you know is what you can sense. You can feel, you maybe hear a little bit of the water in the background, you can feel that you're on the water, but you don't kind of necessarily know what's ahead. All you know is what you're experiencing in the moment. And so draw back a little bit, the only way that really you can know what's ahead is from other people who perhaps have come before you. So there may have been other people that have gone down that river in barrels similar to yours, and they may know that there's a waterfall up ahead, and there may be nothing you can do about going over that waterfall. And different people have different experiences in going over the waterfall. Some might have had a relatively smooth ride going over the edge and landing in the pool at the bottom and being able to sail safely on. Others may have hit rocks as they went down the waterfall, or hit tree branches and the like, and so it may have been a fairly bumpy ride. And still others may have not landed in the pool. They may have I don't know, kind of been diverted off to another stream somewhere else and gone a completely different path. And so really the only way that you can understand what potentially can come before you is through these stories that people have told to you in their career experiences. And it's not so much that any one way of going down that river can be classified as the right way, because it can't. It's just that there are a number of different ways of going down that river. And so the more conversations you have and the more stories you are told by people who have gone down that river, the greater database or the greater bank of experiences you have to draw on, so that when you're in some of these different situations, you're able to say, oh, I remember a story that John told me a while back and he hit these rocks. Or I remember a story from Lucy and she said that she hit a calm patch right here. And it's not that, again, any one way is the right way. It's just that you're more aware of and can account for different situations happening because you've heard about them beforehand. And so the premise of the book and of my presentation here today, in drawing on what I just mentioned, is that I'm not here to dictate some kind of clinical definitive solution that everyone can and must follow, and that if you do it, everything will work out fine, but if you don't do it, nothing will work out okay. All I can do is relay what's happened and what experiences I have had, in the hope that doing so will help you at least think about similar situations that you might get into, and be able to draw from at least one data point from someone else you've had a conversation with, to be able to say, I'm in this situation, I remember that story this person told, here's a way that they approached it, do I want to use that same approach? And so please take everything I say today somewhat cautiously. Don't take it verbatim. Internalize it, say, what does it mean to me? And if it's useful, good. If you don't feel it's useful, then put it to the side. But that's the intent with which I present the material today. And so kind of getting on to the first topic, which I'm sure probably may sound like a bit of a trite statement, but it's fairly true, and there's a lot in it. That is that engineering, it's more than technology. And basically what I say there, the little quote down the bottom, engineering is a professional art of applying science to the optimum conversion of natural resources to the benefit of man. Now, Ralph James Smith, I admit I don't know really who that person was or what they did, but I thought it was quite a good quote that encapsulates kind of the intent with which I see engineering and with which I write about it in the book. And that is that engineering is a purpose-driven discipline. It's very different from science. Science is very much about exploring, about finding out the art of the possible. Engineering is really kind of separate from that in that it's purpose-driven, and it's about the art of delivery. And because engineering is a human endeavour, it means that we deliver things for the benefit of people. When you see it in that light, you can very readily start to put engineering in its place with other disciplines. And when you see it in the light of people's, or the customer, the end customer being people, you start to say, okay, what is it that people need? What is it that people want? And their needs can be, sometimes they can be very explicit, and sometimes they can be implicit. An example I'll take is the cellular telephone, so the mobile phone. You have an explicit need, which is people want to communicate with one another, and you have an implicit need. The implicit need is more the feeling aspect. People want to feel connected to one another. They want a feeling of connectivity. They want a feeling of community. They want a feeling of camaraderie. And so when you understand those two aspects of the need, you start to then get into being able to inform what your design solution might be. And you also start to see that your design solution is being driven by, as I said, this need, which then starts to get you away from just developing technology for the sake of it. I think all of us have seen technology that's been developed with bells and whistles on it, which when it gets into the market reacts very poorly to it. And this is usually kind of what you see sometimes in a lot of startups, whereby they've got a great technical solution, but it's and everyone's probably heard this statement beforehand, it's a solution looking for a problem. What they're talking about there, of course, is, well, what's the need? You haven't identified the need. Another kind of connection I'd like to draw here is kind of a connection to things that are happening in our world at the moment. There was a famous German military theorist called Karl von Clausewitz, and he had a famous saying which said that war is an extension of politics by other means. And what he was talking about there was that war wasn't an end in itself, that it was a means to an end. And so similar is what I'm saying about technology, in that in itself is a means to an end. And this is all the kind of conversation that you hear at the moment, particularly with regards to Afghanistan and Iraq. It's what's our end game? What are we moving towards? What are we heading towards? So similar to that product out in the marketplace without a customer, some people feel like these wars are kind of means to what end? And so that's the challenge there. If you take a look at all the big engineering projects that have happened in the past and are happening now, some of the past ones like the Hoover Dam, National Transportation System, and so on, even the Space Shuttle, the International Space Station, they're all filling a social policy need. And so again, they're technology programs which are great in their own right, but they're moving towards satisfying some need. The Space Shuttle and our International Space Station, the needs there were, at the end of the day, were national prestige. The whole idea about spacefaring nations is that it's an exclusive club, that very few other countries can do it, and that has connotations for how that country is seen by the rest of the world. the United States is seen as a technological powerhouse because it is seen as one of the very few countries around the world that has the capability to send humans into space. And this is the reason why there's a lot of consternation at the moment about national space policy, because that's soon to be taken off the table. And I think a lot of politicians are worried about that, because they say, well, if we're no longer seen as the country that can send humans into space, will that mean that people have less confidence in the United States as being one of those technology leaders? And so you can I think you can start to see how really the need is what drives technology, and that understanding the need is very important. And this also brings into question, or into focus, particularly with these big engineering projects, that it's more than just the design of the thing, the space shuttle, the road, the truck, the whatever. And you start to look at the product life cycle. So design, which we're most familiar with and most engineers are comfortable with, is but one part of an overall product life cycle. It actually starts with the customer need, but then moves through design, development, build, entry into service, and then retirement and disposal or removal from service, if you're talking about a particular product. When you look at it in that way, you start to realize, okay, engineering is involved with more than just the design phase. It's actually involved across the whole life cycle. And when you look at it in that way, people start to appreciate then that engineering can be used for a whole range of different things, such as areas like design for manufacturability, design for cost, design for reusability. All these kind of things start to factor into your design. And so there's a number of different elements that people start to become aware of in terms of engineering being more than just design. And so if people start to think about engineering being way more than design, how do we keep track of all the moving parts? How do we understand, or how do we focus our energies so that we kind of think clearly and logically, and don't go all over the place? Well, that moves me on to the next topic, which is about writing. And for most engineers, writing can tend to be a bit of a dirty word, but I believe it's looked upon that way. Hang on, why are my slides moving? Sorry about that. It's looked upon, I think, in an improper way by most engineers. Oh, it's something I have to do. When in fact, writing, as mentioned down here by William Zinsser, who's an American playwright, from what I understand, he encapsulated it perfectly. Writing is thinking on paper. And writing actually is part of the thinking process. And so what happens when you write, you actually are focused and deliberative in your thoughts. And as you write, your thoughts start to, kind of like a snowball effect, they start to have kind of a sense of fluidity, a sense of connectivity. Your ideas tend to be enriched more than if you kind of had just kept them all up in your head, or you don't synthesize them. They tend to, I'm sure most of you have this experience. You might have been thinking about something, and someone says, well, go and write it down. Go and sit down and write it down. And as you start to write, it just tends to solidify things a whole lot more, and it also tends to help your thinking a whole lot more. You start to make connections that weren't originally there, and it helps you fully flesh out your ideas, your logic, and your reasoning. And this is a bit of a challenge in today's world, because most of our thinking, most of our communication, most of our interactions tend to be bite-sized. They tend to be truncated, they tend to be discrete. And what the unintended consequences of that, I believe, is that over time, as you are continuously engaging in those discrete, bite-sized, short, sharp communication, because it's like a muscle. You're no longer exercising your creativity. You're no longer exercising your ability to focus on an issue or to think about an issue for a sustained period of time, which as engineers we actually really need to do, particularly those involved in the design phase, but really it can be in any element of the engineering paradigm, that we need to set aside time to sit down and think about some of these issues that we are grappling with, because otherwise we come up with solutions that are very superficial, don't undertake or don't consider all the different interactions, and don't fully think through all the consequences. And so I guess that's my kind of call for action for people to engage in writing things down and actually setting aside time to actually to write, the practice of writing at work, at home, wherever. So that's kind of why I've found in one of the kind of element that I'd like to mention before we move on to the next topic about writing is that there's this idea about, or writing has many different levels to it. The 17th century mathematician Blaise Pascal uttered a famous quote that went, I'm paraphrasing, of, "I would have written a shorter letter if I had had the time." And what he was talking about there was people who write in the first instance, you write without pause. You want to get your ideas down, and usually what that is it's a very long form of writing. Your ideas are in longhand, but they tend to be scrappy. They tend to be all over the place. They tend to be somewhat, perhaps, not all connected up. When you go back through it again, then you start striking out words, superfluous language, focusing on grammar, those kind of things. You start to shorten up the language. And the final version, if you compared it to your initial version, what you would find is that it's actually a whole lot shorter and a lot more succinct than what you initially started with. And so, ironically, what happens is that your longest form of writing happens in the first instance, and your succinct or final form happens in the final instance. That only happens if you actually practice or if you realize and are aware of the fact that writing happens in layers. So you have to come back and revisit what you've written maybe 2 or 3 times. And so why is, again, trying to connect this back to engineering, why beyond the assistance of the thinking process is writing necessary for the engineer? And I guess my response would be this, in that in engineering, most of your work is going to be assessed in a written form, or at least the way you communicate is either verbally or written. And people make very quick decisions based upon written work on the quality of it. And so to help in that quality, to help in your thinking, to help in kind of engaging in various ideas, you know, we have a couple of possible different avenues that we can go down. One is we can read books, we can learn from kind of articles, watch TV. Another avenue that we can go down, however, to engage in kind of understanding ideas better and getting ideas that we never would have thought of, is networking. And so networking is an area that also engineers don't typically tend to spend or want to spend a hell of a lot of time on. And the quote there by Isaac Newton, if I've seen further, is by standing on the shoulders of giants. I mentioned that there in this context. Just a background, his quote here, what most people think he was referring to was that he was talking about how when he formulated the universal law of gravitation, he was actually referring to the fact that he had drawn upon a substantive body of work that had been done by Johannes Kepler, who's a 17th century German mathematician, who came up with the planetary laws of motion. So he was saying, I can only come up with my universal law of gravitation having understood and known this body of work from Kepler before me. And so really what Newton was engaged in there in a rather crude form was networking. If he hadn't understood, if he hadn't read, if he hadn't engaged with people like Kepler, he never potentially would have come up with his universal law of gravitation. And so what I'm saying here is that a lot of problems that we experience and a lot of issues that people experience in engineering have actually been solved, or at least worked, or at least come across in other industries or in other companies, perhaps those outside of your industry. So an aerospace company might be grappling with a problem that an agricultural company may have addressed or come across. And so there really is, from my mind, no better way to access or to engage varied and different ideas than to network with people from not only within your discipline, engineering, but also potentially outside of your discipline as well, and outside of your industry. And from my mind, the best way to approach networking and the best way to get the most out of it is really to go into it not thinking about what you can get out of it, what tangible kind of information can you get, but really to go into it with a curious mind, and to also go into it understanding the law of reciprocity. What I mean there is that if you approach each situation with how can I help this person, how can I engage them, how can I help them meet their needs, again going back to the whole needs issue that I mentioned in the earlier slide, you'll find that through the law of reciprocity, most people will feel, on the receiving end, will feel compelled to help that person that helps them. It's just a tendency that we all have, and in fact you see this all the time in marketing, whereby they'll have free gifts for people, and people will feel compelled to buy something in addition to that free gift because of that law of reciprocity. I guess another element that I would say with regards to networking is that it's really important for people to listen with the intent to understand and not the intent to respond. What I mean there is that when people are talking, you need to listen intently to what they're saying, internalize it, and try and build on what they're saying when you reply, as opposed to when they're saying something, blocking that out and saying, okay, what am I going to say now? If you do that, you will tend to lose the person that you're quote unquote engaged with. And so networking, as I mentioned, kind of highlights the fact that there's a number of different interconnections, or the industries that are seemingly, and companies that are seemingly disconnected are actually connected through common problems, common issues, what have you. And this kind of leads me into, I guess, my final point here, which is an area of systems. And this image, for those of you who are aware of it, comes from a movie called The Graduate. It's a 1960s movie, and it's a young Dustin Hoffman there, kind of on the left-hand side. But this quote, where it says just one word, it's actually a part of a scene where, and I've got the YouTube clip there if anyone wants to go and check it out. It's part of a scene where this older gentleman, who's a friend of Dustin Hoffman's father, has a company or whatever, and he wants to give Dustin Hoffman advice because he's just graduated from college. And he's saying, you know, I've got one word for you. And Dustin Hoffman sits there listening, and he says, plastics. He says, that's the way of the future. You know, there's a big future in it. And so he leaves Dustin Hoffman to ponder that. And so, kind of in a similar vein, I guess my not putting myself in that kind of role of being so senior, but certainly from the few years that I've been involved with the industry, about 12 years now, from what I've seen, my one word would be systems. And I say that because it's all about seeing the connections. It's all about on multiple levels. If we talk about the specific engineering level, if you look at the majority of the work today around the world, it's all tied into systems and system of systems. You look at our national transportation system, so our roads, our bridges, our railways, the smart grid, their power system. That's been a very explicit issue that has been brought to the surface that needs an overhaul on a large scale. Our power system, the fact that our power system operates in an isolated way, and really what the idea is in making a smart grid is have a distributed system where we could load share and really connect up in a system-to-systems fashion, our national power infrastructure. You look at everything to do in aerospace. It's all about systems and system of systems, connecting up different capabilities and providing a common way for systems to interface. Another issue with regards to systems, however, is heritage. And by that I mean, how do you connect different capabilities in a way that ensures that you're not harming or destroying legacy capabilities? So for example, in a village, there might be a need for a water system to be put in place. This happens particularly in third world countries. They might be looking to try and upgrade their infrastructure in a kind of a third world country with their water system. How do you do that in a way that interacts in a fashion with the town that they don't have to level the whole town and make a new one just so that it can interact with the new water system? You want to make sure that the inhabitants stay in their homes but can have the benefit of this new water system, but as I said, in a fashion that doesn't destroy their legacy homes. Another way, or other systems we talked about beforehand, about cell phones. It's all about, the cell phone is a really good example I see of a systems approach. Cell phones are all about providing that original capability of communication, but enhancing, particularly now, that idea of connectivity, that idea of collaboration, that idea of community. Because most of the cell phones you find now have incorporated that kind of social network element, Facebook or whatever. In fact, it's really driven now such that, in a way, social networking has almost become a commodity, in that phones now have that incorporated standard, and that those that don't are really the outliers. In fact, I see pretty quickly, that social networking will kind of become a standard part in probably a lot of our communication devices, because it's so prevalent now, because it's part of our backdrop, part of the actual the culture. Biotechnology is another great example of systems approach. You've got the human system, and now how do you look at that in a way that you can incorporate or interface with the systems that we are born with synthetic or artificial or substitute parts, artificial legs or limbs or whatever, but also organs, as well as enhancements, talking about implants in the brain or whatever, using implants under the skin to be able to open doors, operate vehicles and the like. This is all about understanding where the human-machine interface is, and to do that you need to have a good understanding of systems and where the boundaries lie and where the interfaces are. And so I guess a kind of ending point on systems, I'd say, is that for a good understanding of the systems perspective, it's that you're the owner of the parts, but not the you're not the owner of the parts, but the steward of the whole. By that I mean you don't necessarily own any particular one part of the system, but you have an understanding and appreciation of the whole aspect of the system. So they're kind of some of the main elements, or I guess 3 topics that I wanted to talk about that I explore in a bit more detail in the book. Again, as part of, I guess, my initial slide where I mentioned about my role being more of a facilitator, more of a person who isn't dictating, but rather just telling what I've experienced and what I've seen. Because of that, I see that there's a number of other people who have written books who have taken some different approaches, but which I think combined together provide you a very good coverage of all the different aspects that perhaps you might face in a career or in your positions. And so this first one here, Augustine's Laws, it's a book that was written in '97. It's a bit lengthy, 395 pages, but Norm Augustine, former CEO of Lockheed Martin, and he put down a vast array of laws, experiences, anecdotes, quotes, what have you, in this book. And all these books you can find on Amazon.com, but it was a fairly extensive body of work. This person here, Carl Selinger, who I'm sure most of you will recognise because he had a webcast here 2 weeks ago, I think it was. His book, Stuff You Don't Learn in Engineering School, it's a bit shorter and it's more current. And I'd say it falls into the tactical career advice. That is, you know, if you're in a meeting, do this, or if your manager does this, do that. It's a very good book, and he's a very learned person, and I think it's definitely worth a read. This one here, 21st Century Engineer, released a couple of years ago by Dr. Patricia Galloway, who actually wrote the foreword to my book. She looks at engineering from a broader perspective, kind of in line with what I do. She's focused on the educational needs of engineers in the future workplace, what kind of things they need to learn and understand. The final one here, Advice to Rocket Scientists. This one's a relatively short read, and it's written from a gentleman who comes out of NASA JPL, so it tends to be coloured by being in that position. But again, it's somewhat of a tactical focus on career, in that he goes over various situations and how to handle them both in industry and academia. But again, it's another good read as well. This final one here, The Unwritten Laws of Engineering, is actually been around for forever. I mean, 1944, it's obviously quite a long time, 70 years ago almost. And this is considered a somewhat timeless advice to engineers. It's quite a short read, 49 pages. And it's actually funny because most recently in 2006, the CEO of Raytheon, Bill Swanson, released a book that was called, what was it? Got it here. It was called Swanson's Unwritten Rules of Management, and many kind of thought that he had perhaps plagiarized or at least leveraged substantially off of this book, The Unwritten Laws of Engineering. And in fact, he had to forfeit some stock and a raise that he otherwise was entitled to by the board of directors of Raytheon, because they had thought it was untoward for him to quote-unquote plagiarize from this book. So that's I guess a kind of a lesson in not to plagiarize so publicly. And so here's some testimonials just to round out the presentation on my book, or people that have received it. As I mentioned at the bottom there, that these shouldn't be seen as kind of official endorsements in any way. You know, you're not going to see Mike Griffin at his next press conference saying, "Go read this book." But there are responses that I have received from each of these gentlemen and ladies that after they looked at it and read it, this was the comments I got back from them. And so in a way, I feel that these have all been positive responses. I've also received responses from students as well that have been rather positive, which is good, because again, the whole reason that I wrote the book was to provide assistance and guidance and facilitation for students and young engineers to kind of answer their own questions rather than me providing answers. So to wrap up, if you want to find out more, if you want to dig a little deeper, you go to the website here, theviewfromherebook.com. It's rather a lengthy URL. Unfortunately, the view from here was taken, so I had to take theviewfromherebook.com. But on the website, you see the ability to get the hardcover, the PDF. I've got iPad and Kindle versions as well. I also have an audio and MP3 version in work at the moment that'll allow people to take the book in bite-sized chunks, depending on wherever you are, on the bus, in your car, whatever. Got some videos there as well where I explore a couple of different avenues that I focus on in the book. Got some articles and reviews. I'm placing them up as I get them. I think there's a couple of articles and 1 or 2 reviews. I have a couple more reviews coming in the next couple of weeks. So again, it's always good for people to see how different publications are received in the market. So that's why I place them up there. And my email address there, reese@theviewfromherebook.com. I'm happy to take anyone's questions through email if you like. I'm more than willing to respond to any questions that people have, so feel free to email me. I'm usually pretty good about responding, so I look forward to those questions if you have them. So if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them now. I didn't see any. Whoop, actually, I tell a lie. There's, oh no, I think that's a thumbs up. I thought there was a question on the hand raised, but I don't think it was. But if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them now. I realise I ran a little bit over time. I think we've got maybe 10 or 20 minutes for questions if people have them. So fire away. Anything at all. Can be any of this material, any feedback about the presentation, anything you would have liked to have heard about, anything at all. See, someone's typing at the moment.
Reese, this is Helen. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I thank you on behalf
Yep,
of...
I've got a question right here, so from Kate. Regarding reciprocity in networking, what kinds of things can very young engineers bring to the table? That's a good question, Kate. I would say by being at the table is what you bring. Most people, taking a step back, most people, I guess, don't realise early on, or at least I didn't realise early on, that really attitude is almost everything. So if you come to a situation eager, willing to help, willing to engage, willing to get involved, that tends to be quite notable, and people really want to engage with those kind of people. And so if you're willing to, as I said, if you're willing to provide assistance to someone with their issue, that in turn will lead to them more than likely providing a level of assistance to you, or be that tangible or intangible, in response to you helping them. And sometimes, I mean, obviously, I guess you take the case where you're talking with a CEO or something like that. Obviously, there may not be much you can do for a CEO, but in just showing an interest in what they're talking about, usually most people, I think at senior levels, are so used to others not paying attention enough. Like, I'm sure we've all had the situation where we're in a meeting and the person you're talking to is either on the BlackBerry, typing on their computer, whatever. Our attention spans are so fractionated today that someone who gives their undivided attention to another person is almost out of the ordinary now, which is, I think, in some ways, it's kind of sad, because when you're communicating with someone, I think it should be expected that the other person is going to pay attention to what you're saying and give you their undivided attention. It's just basic respect, I think. So I hope, Kate, that provides somewhat of an answer. Okay, no problem. Anyone else have any questions? I guess one other thing I would mention is that I'm also working on some other kind of areas. I've written some articles, and we'll also be putting together kind of some other self-contained webinars that I'm going to be putting up on my website that kind of chunk down the book perhaps into smaller pieces and focus on maybe this aspect of communication or this aspect of reciprocity or this aspect of writing, those kind of things in maybe a small 5-minute chunk so that you can watch it, get the main elements out of it and move on. That's one of the things that I'm working on at the moment as well. Because as I said, I realize people's time is valuable and they want to get to the meat of stuff, so that's what I'm trying to get to. And the way I've written the book as well, after each chapter, action items and things you can do in 5 minutes, I wrote that all with the young professional in mind. So I guess last chance for anyone to ask any questions. Looks like that's it. I appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you very much, Reese.
Oh, Susan, thank you very much. Daryl, thanks very much. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.